Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Walk Show podcast, where we explore the walk of life. This is your host, Walker Neer. We've got a pretty exciting show for you today. We are joined by a longtime friend of mine named Elizabeth Miner. Elizabeth is someone who has actually made it a goal to travel to every continent in the world, and actually just recently achieved that goal by traveling to Antarctica. Unfortunately, while she was traveling to Antarctica, the COVID-19 pandemic outbreak situation kind of came to to pass. So she found herself in Antarctica and trying to travel back home through South America when the United States was largely starting to shut down. So I was really excited to have Elizabeth join us and talk about not only her adventures in traveling, but also specifically what it was like to be abroad, when COVID-19 was all happening. Really interesting stories, and Elizabeth's just a really fun person, so I think you'll really enjoy the conversation. As always, the music for today's episode is provided by Misha Zarin, so thank you, Misha, as always, for the music. And without further ado, let's jump over to the conversation with Elizabeth. Welcome to the Walk Show podcast, Elizabeth Miner. Thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
For sure. So I've known you for quite a long time now, actually. Maybe 10 years. Has it been 10 years? Is that possible?
Probably more like 7 or 8.
Okay.
Yeah, so close to 10.
Okay. I just always round to 10, I think. Anytime I've done someone for more than 2 years, I'm like, it's close to 10.
I remember I deal with numbers, so I'm like very precise.
Oh, right.
Like, wait a minute.
Right. Yeah, you're keeping a ledger of the years that we've known. That's fair.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
I have a little book with all my friends, and I'm like, oh, they're 5.5 years. He's 8 years.
That's good. So one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on the show is that you have I guess a passion is probably the right word for traveling, but not just within the United States, but really all around the world. Is that how you would define it, or how would you explain your adventures?
Oh, yeah, I think you hit the head on the nail on the head.
Yeah.
I mean, I love traveling in the U.S., abroad. Like, I told someone one time, I was like, there's actually no place that isn't on my list, because I just haven't looked up every place yet, but I'm sure that like every place has something to offer.
No offense to our listeners in Mississippi, but even Mississippi, like there's something there you'd want to go see.
I mean, there's the ocean. I'm sure there's a pretty beach somewhere.
Okay. All right. That's fair. What about Louisiana? Oh yeah, it's got New Orleans. All right. I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm done. I digress.
Maybe North Dakota, but even then, like, I think they have a national park up there that's supposed to be pretty.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, I've never been really anywhere. I've traveled very little in the United States, definitely never abroad at all. So how did you kind of come into that? Did you travel a lot growing up? Is that something that you did throughout your childhood, or when did that come to pass?
Okay, so growing up a little bit, like I think I was a little bit more fortunate than other kids. My mom has horses, so we would always take them camping. And at first it was just within the state, and then we started spreading to Arkansas, and then she bought this trailer when I was about 10. And that's when we started doing more, like, we went out to Wyoming for 3 weeks and rode all through like the mountains and everything. And I don't actually think I appreciated it when I was that age. Like,
Sure.
I thought everyone did it, I was just like, oh, where's going out west? Like, camping and all that's super cheap. So it wasn't like an expensive trip.
Right. Well, and you're not picking it, so you're kind of being drug along with the family or whatever. So
Yeah.
I think that's probably pretty normal. Well, that's why I was curious, because, for me, like, the extent of my traveling when I was a kid was my family. So obviously I'm from, Southwest Missouri, and my parents both are originally from Iowa. So really the travel I did was we would go to Iowa, which is,
see family.
yeah. And I mean, not that it wasn't fun. There weren't good times in that, but it wasn't traveling to a destination. The destination was to see family, not to see a scene, or to see the Grand Canyon or an ocean, or, whatever the case may be. So I don't know. I think that because as an adult, I haven't really ever prioritized traveling either. And I at least like to blame that on, not blame it on my parents, like that they did anything wrong, but just that I didn't grow up with that. So it's just not something I even really think about. You know what I mean? Like
Oh yeah.
it's just
So
not something I would consider.
I'm gonna tell you a story. Like, so that was all in-state travel, right? It wasn't until I was 14 that I actually went abroad for the first time. And
Mm,
I think that's what actually sparked the passion for traveling because so my mom's side of the family, they've always traveled. Like my grandma, my aunt, uncle, mom, they have been all over the world to Australia, Europe several times, Russia when my mom was younger, like all these places because of my grandma. I think she loves traveling. So when I was 14, my middle brother was studying over in abroad in the Netherlands. And so we went over there and went to France, England, and then the Netherlands. And I remember being 14 and staring at the Eiffel Tower at night, and it's like glittering and gold and gorgeous, and being like, oh my gosh, I didn't think this would ever happen in my life. And it made me
mm.
realize that like you can go wherever you want to go.
Right, right. Yeah, there are the restrictions are all just made up largely. I mean,
Yeah,
if
like
it's something that you want to prioritize, you can prioritize it.
I was like the standard like 14-year-old girl, you know, like you watch like these rom-com movies or whatever, and they always like talk about Paris as if it's like this far off place. And all of a sudden here I was at 14, like I mean it cost a little bit of money, don't get me wrong, and I didn't pay any of that at that age, but like it made me realize, oh my gosh, like you can go wherever you want to go. You just have to make it happen.
Right, right. So, so when was the first time that you traveled abroad alone? Or, and when I say alone, I guess not as not with your parents is more what I mean.
So actually right after I graduated college, so when I was 24, so I traveled a little bit before I got into college with my mom. Like we went abroad for my high school graduation present, and then we went to Canada before I graduated, and then Bahamas on a cruise. So that was it. That was the extent of my traveling abroad. And I told myself, okay, get through college, save up, and get a job to where you can go 2 weeks abroad every single year. And so before I even started my job, one of my best friends she was working over in China for 6 weeks.
Mm,
And when she was applying for the job, I was like, if you get this, I'm coming to visit you because when else will I ever have a friend in China?
sure.
So it ended up being four of us girls. We went to China, Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines for almost an entire month. And I was just sold. And I was actually mad at myself for not traveling during college.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair, but I mean, traveling during college is, I mean, you don't really have much of an income, and there's a lot
Yeah.
of, I don't know. I would think that that could be more challenging than it would be
But
when you're an adult, full
it
fledged.
reignited like the passion. And I'm like, what is wrong with me? Like, I love this kind of stuff. And I haven't traveled for like 4 years.
Sure, sure. No, that makes sense. It it's funny because in thinking and trying to understand this and relate it to myself, like I guess my traveling is just video games. Like, I have this enormous library of video games at this point, and if I always say, like, if I could travel back in time to like 10-year-old me and be like, dude, I know that you can only get to rent a game every once in a while now, but if you just hold out, you will have more games than the store has in it today, all at your fingertips anytime you want. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
and one time I've never gone years without gaming though, but I remember one time it was like a couple of months where my PC had died, and I was working as a line cook in a kitchen and just didn't have the money right away to replace it. And so I had to save up for a couple months, and I did. And I remember once I got it, like, it's not like I was beside myself with anxiety or something when when I couldn't game. I mean, I just started reading more and probably lived a healthy
Doing other stuff. Yeah.
right. But then as soon as I got it back, it was just, I mean, it was kind of almost creepy how much I was like, ah, yes, how I've longed for you. So sounds like that kind of, probably even more so since it was years for you where you weren't able to travel.
Well, yeah. And you hear, like, I mean, you get it with the video games and everything else, but like, you hear people like going, and you're like, wait a minute, what? And like, I just told myself, like, get through college and then you'll get a job and then you can afford whatever you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I was lucky enough, like, the company I work for, they give us 4 weeks.
Mm.
Now, they work us like dogs, but you get 4 weeks of vacation. and then you can opt for an extra fifth. So I, ever since I first started, opted for the extra fifth. And as soon as I found out I had 5 weeks of vacation, I was like, okay, well now I need to do 2 trips at minimum every single year, 2 weeks abroad, or, you know, 2 2-week trips abroad.
So at this point, you never really travel domestically anymore, at least not for that long of a period?
No, I've done 2 domestic trips since like China, which was 2014. And it was more of one of my best friends, she wanted to go to the Grand Canyon. And I was like, you know what? I've never been. I love road trips. I was like, let's do it. And then my mom mentioned going, she loves Yosemite National Park out in California. And I love Zion, which I had done on that previous road trip. And I was like, let's make it happen. Let's do the States for 2 weeks over Thanksgiving. So that's what we did.
I feel like when a lot of people plan vacations, like, or maybe not a lot of people, but some people when they plan vacations, they plan to like do certain activities. Like they want to go, you know, like maybe they go to the Grand Canyon or they go to Yosemite, but really kind of like what you talked about when you were a kid, like really the objective is to be camping. And it's a cool place to be camping, but like the activity is almost as important as the location. Mm-hmm. Are you driven by that sort of stuff, or are you really trying to just, you know, see more sights kind of thing, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I would almost actually say it's like a mixture of both. There are some places that I'm like, how do I want to word this? Like the destination is the goal, and another is like, well, I want to experience this type of whatever.
I see.
Like I get giddy
Go ahead.
no matter what it is. Like I can be out in like a national park and I'm just like, look at this gorgeous tree. We just don't have this back home. Or
Right.
you know, I could be like, I want to feel like a European or whatever, and then walk through the streets of Europe.
Right. A long time ago, there was a show called The Chappelle Show, which is probably my favorite skit show of all time. And in it, there was a skit where Dave Chappelle makes his hands into kind of a W shape and yells Wu-Tang at people. And so we used to all hang out and really party together at this couple's house that we're all friends with that used to live here, and now they live in Kansas City. But anyway, and that's how I met you. And constantly I would always do the Wu-Tang thing, which was always a reference to Chappelle's show. Now, a lot of people I came to find later actually thought that I was just a huge fan of Wu-Tang Clan, which, I mean, I don't dislike Wu-Tang Clan, but I don't like sit around and listen to that really. It was really just always the joke. Anyway, this all ties to your China trip, because whenever we would do group photos or anything like that, I would always insist that the group do the Wu-Tang thing and all of us make the W with our hands. And my favorite picture maybe ever is you on the Great Wall of China, of all places, doing the Wu-Tang. Like, it's just kind of indescribable. Like, no, like, who has that picture? The fact that my terrible joke reference to that traveled all the way around the globe to the Great Wall of China, of all places, it made my day then, and I can still think about it now and gain pleasure just from remembering it. So it's such a good photo. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. I did it just for you, Walker.
I know. Who else is Wu-Tanging?
I think I actually sent it to you like as soon as I did it, didn't I? Maybe it was like right after I got back.
Yeah, it was pretty close. And I think I was equally as excited at that time, but that excitement has never subsided. Just know. So.
Well, yeah, that was for the audience, I guess, for their reference. Like, that's when I was hanging out with, you know, this Kansas City friends and everyone else so often. And we were Wu-Tanging every single time we were together. Right. And I think it was you that were like, you should Wu-Tang when you're in China. I don't even, maybe you didn't say it. And I was just like, oh, I'm a Wu-Tang when I'm a wall. But every single country on that trip, I Wu-Tanged. And I actually think I Wu-Tanged for like maybe 3 years after that.
Yeah. I know it's kind of fallen off now in recent years. But we did it sometime recently when we were all back in Springfield. I think the last time there was a group photo with the Wu-Tang in it. So it still comes up once in a while.
Once in a while, yeah. It was big in like, what was it, like 14 through 16, I feel like was the Wu-Tang years for me.
Right, yeah. Well, it was honestly
13.
Probably just until they moved to Kansas City and I stopped having a platform to shout Wu-Tang at people with, you know.
You telling me you don't shout out on the podcast every single time?
I don't. To the listener's delight, I do not. Well, so yeah. So you said you went to Europe when you were in high school still. Then you went to China. Have you been anywhere else in Asia?
Yeah, so I've been to Asia twice. So it was that 2014 China trip and everything. And then I went back to Hong Kong, Thailand, Vietnam, and Cambodia
Mm,
in 2017, spring of 2017.
okay. So
Highly, I recommend everywhere I go, honestly.
yeah, I mean, I've seen some photos. I guess I was started to say screenshots showing how inundated I am with gaming, but just a picture actually of some pretty crazy scenes out in Asia. Like I think in Vietnam specifically, with just like I don't know, mountains and just really colorful trees, and the water is very still and has like lily pads on it. And I don't know, it's just very beautiful scenes that I was pretty surprised by.
Yeah, the one, I don't know if you're referring to my pictures or just pictures in general, but the picture you just described remind me of Hanoi, which is like, and it's farther north, and it's has a lot of museums and a historical background to it, and it was just gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous.
So, where do you have a place that you've traveled there in Asia that you would prefer?
So my least preference is probably Thailand, and that's just because when I went, it was myself, which I'm a short white girl with one of my best friends who's also short and white, and then her husband. So we have three white people working around, and there's two girls and one guy, and we were constantly harassed in Bangkok in particular, especially where we were staying was more of a tourist destination. And we
Mm,
would see like three guys walk in front of us, like 15 minutes, a couple of feet ahead of us, and no one would bother them. And then as soon as we walk by, they would like constantly surround us. And I don't
mm,
like being hassled that much.
sure.
So originally Thailand was like the worst place I got hassled, but now that's Egypt, but only parts of Egypt.
So yeah, I mean, what's the scariest encounter you've had when traveling abroad?
Um, I've been really fortunate to where we haven't had a scary encounter. Like I remember in Peru, we had a guy turn around and start following us. And I
Mm,
don't know if he was actually following us. It just happened that we walked by and he turned around and he was like following us down some places I wouldn't have expected, but
hmm.
nothing ever came of that. In Thailand, they tried getting us to go into a building, and I was like, I don't see any windows. I don't see any people. Like, I'm not entering this building. I'm going to sit right here, my tuk tuk, and you're going to take me to where you told me you would take me.
Right. So do you ever show your dad Taken and you're like, look, take some notes here because I'm gonna be
I
abroad.
might need you to come rescue me.
I might need you to be Liam Neeson in this shit. Yeah.
So I'm short. I'm like 5'3", and I weigh whatever. But I like to think that if someone starts threatening me, that I'm gonna get really feisty. Like you are not you are not taking me down. I will go for the eyes. I will go for private parts. Like
Well, I'm glad that you have never had to prove whether or not that is effective.
yeah,
Because yeah, that would be bad. Well, that's good. So all the travel abroad and really not anything that stands out as like a truly scary moment or anything. Pretty much just
yeah.
been
So
relaxed.
that's what's interesting because I think a lot of people are scared to travel. So I was a little nervous if I think back on it now, like going to Asia for the very first time because that's such a different language barrier.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, we're so fortunate. The majority of the world speaks some English. Like, it's
Right.
just the business world, and I've never had a problem. Like, there are sometimes, like, yeah, I can't communicate properly, but you can point, you can smile, like, yeah.
Hmm. Well, so went through Europe, went through Asia. You said you went to Egypt. Did you go to any other parts of Africa at all, or just primarily Egypt?
I went to Morocco. So I went to Spain and Morocco shortly after high school graduation. That was like my graduation trip. So I had taken 4 years of Spanish. So my mom had originally promised Ireland, and then my school had this program. It's the only like actual tour I've ever done through EFT tours, and they were like, "We're going to Spain and Morocco. Like, sign up," and it was discounted because we were students. So I like begged my mom. I was like, "Can we go to Spain instead?" And so I went to Morocco that time, and I honestly want to go back because we were only over there for like a day and a half, and it's just not enough time to appreciate the culture. And then other than that, yeah, it's just Egypt are my only two African countries so far.
And at this point, I'm just quizzing you about where you've been in the world. What about Russia? Have you ever been?
Russia is on my list. It's actually supposed to be extremely difficult for Americans to get passports. And then from the people that I have talked to, they have actually they've gone. They recommend that you actually travel with a Russian if you can, because there's so much corruption and like bribery going on.
Ah.
But regardless, I'm going to go. It's just a matter of time.
And then you've been to Australia?
Yeah, I went to Australia and New Zealand last year. Okay, so frame of reference, my goal was all 7 continents by the time I turned 30. One of my best friends, her goal was 30 countries by 30. And I was like, oh, that's a really cool goal. I'm not going to steal it, right? Like, I'm going to come up with my own goal. So mine was 7 continents. So I've been to Europe. I went to Asia for the first time in 2014, went to South America for the first time in 2015, and then Africa, which I already hit Morocco, but Africa was another, or Egypt was another one. No, I'm just rambling.
No, you're good.
Then Australia. So 2 or 3 years ago, I told my best friend, I was like, I either want to go to Australia, New Zealand 2019 or Antarctica 2019, and then the opposite year. Last year in May, we went to Australia and New Zealand for basically an entire month. And then this year, I just got back from Antarctica.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. So I was gonna to get to that in a bit, but we can go there now. So
we
yes,
can save it. Up to you.
No, it's fine. So you literally just got back from Antarctica, or at least from that trip, within the last few days.
Yeah,
right?
It was on the 26th.
26th of March, and so I was in Orlando, Florida, from March 5th through March 9th is when I came back, or maybe I think it was the 9th, whatever, right around that window of time. And at that point, the coronavirus stuff was a really big deal in China, certainly, and had started to become a really big deal in Italy and parts of Europe already. And in the United States, it was still, people knew about it. I had already done a podcast about it, but it wasn't really a part of the national conversation yet, if you will, or if it was largely being dismissed by a lot of people. And I don't know, just not really as serious as it could have been. It wasn't looked at that way. However, it was literally like I came back on a Monday, and I think on Wednesday is when the NBA got canceled, which to me, I'm an NBA fan, so of course that's like a milestone, but that just seemed like when it was just like, oh wow, this just got real, you know what I mean? Like this is a significant change that's happening now as a result of this. So didn't you leave for Antarctica like right around that window of time?
Yeah, so I left the country on March 5th. So the same time that you were down in Orlando. I flew out of St. Louis to Miami to Buenos Aires, and then from there down to Ushuaia, because you have to go to basically the end of the world to catch a boat to Antarctica. Your options are Chile or Argentina, and we chose Argentina. So I left on the 5th, arrived in Argentina on the 6th. Our boat departed on the 8th, and I had a wonderful time in Antarctica. But I would agree, it sounds like on the 11th, which is roughly Wednesday, is when the world started crashing down around us. And like we were so far remote, like as passengers, we didn't have Wi-Fi. Now I think you could have purchased Wi-Fi, but I was like, I don't care about Wi-Fi right now. Like I'm here to see Antarctica, not to be on my phone at night.
Right, right.
So I literally had no clue what was happening. Before I left, several people asked me if I was concerned about the virus. And I was like, well, I was naive at that time. I was like, it's in Asia. And if I was going to Asia, I think I would maybe consider like postponing my trip. I don't even think it was that bad in Italy at the time. Like, I think it started in it, like, you know, cases were starting to flare up, but I don't think it was to the degree it is now. So I was just like, no, like South America doesn't have any cases. Antarctica doesn't have any cases. I like made a probably inappropriate joke about like, hopefully our boat isn't, you know, case one or whatever.
Sure.
But our or expedition company, cruise company, whatever you want to call it, they had even sent out an email to us like probably 3 weeks before we left saying that if you are from certain countries, you are not allowed on this boat and that they will allow you to go on another trip within the next 2 years. But for right now, you can't come on this trip. And then they said, if you have a fever, because we will all get health scans before we get on the boat, you will not be allowed on and you will not get refunded. Like if you're going to not change your trip now, then we're not going to refund you when you show up.
Wow.
Yeah. So we all got health scans before we even got on the boat. And I was like super nervous because you're so excited to get on this boat and it's such a big trip. And I've been planning it for years and we finally booked everything. And I was like, oh my gosh, do I have a fever? I was like constantly having my friend feel my forehead. And they were like, no, shut up.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, I mean, it's been 3 weeks now since I returned from Orlando, and you know, obviously, I'm not ill, so I guess it all worked out. But in hindsight, I probably shouldn't have gone. You know what I mean? Like, knowing now what I do.
Yeah, hindsight's 2020. I mean, that's a thing. Like, I'm sad that we were so naive about the virus, but at the same time, like, you just don't know, and now we do.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, unfortunately, you know, something I talk about a lot on this show is that there's so much sensationalism in the world and in the media that it creates this boy who cried wolf syndrome throughout all the media narratives, where it can be hard to discern what is actually important and like what's just noise, because everything is so noisy, because everything is sensationalized to such a degree. That it's, I mean, I was in the same boat. I mean, I'd even already recorded and I think put out the episode that I did with Chris Crabtree about the coronavirus, because he's been following it since December. So I knew it was a real thing. It wasn't that I thought it was just the flu or, you know, any of those dismissive things like that. But I don't know. I wasn't anticipating that we were getting ready to enter the time that we have since entered.
Yeah, like a pandemic. Well, honestly, my mom's a nurse and she said the exact same thing to me today. We were talking about it because I think when I left, she was just like, just be careful, you know, like wash your hands. Like, I don't think it will affect you guys down there. And we were going to such remote places. Mm-hmm. The only time I was ever concerned about it, I was like, well, if someone has it on my flight.
Right.
But I was just like, once we get to the places we're going, like, we're not going to see people at all. Like, we were going to be backpacking in Argentina. We were going to go to Chile and backpack. We were going to Antarctica, like such desolate places. It was never a concern at the beginning, obviously.
Yeah. And that's part of the reason I say Orlando is a mistake. Probably, you know, again, I guess it wasn't, since it so far at least has worked out. But, I was going to a podcast conference where it was at a resort hotel where there's 1,800 people just for the podcast conference, plus untold numbers of other people that are there for whatever other events people are there for, you know, whether it be to go to Disney or to Universal, or I know there was, you know, sports teams there. There were high school kids and middle school kids running around all over the place. So there was just an enormous amount of people all in a very close proximity. So that's why I say it was probably more risky than I should have been willing to bear, but you know, whatever.
Well, and what's crazy is that if you had been like 2 weeks later, I think you probably would have gotten it. Like, as scary as that is to say.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think honestly, if it had been the next weekend, I would have canceled, right? Like, I wouldn't have gone. Mm-hmm. It was just crazy how it hit literally just before it became clear how serious it really is. At least to to those of us who weren't paying attention closely enough, I guess.
Yeah. So that's what I was going to say. So, we go to Antarctica. I'm just going to tell you about Antarctica real quick, and then we'll get back.
Yeah, no, that's what yep, go.
So for anyone that's listening, if you're like, oh, I don't really want to go to Antarctica, before I went, I would only tell people, like, if you really want to go, say, like, you should only go if you really want to go, right? Like, it's the most expensive trip I've ever taken in my life. You have to save up for it. Like, it's not. All my other trips, I feel like I recommend any given day because you can easily put yourself on a payment plan or something and you can make this happen. They're not expensive, but this is an expensive trip. Mm-hmm. After going, I'm like, everyone needs to save up. You need to go. This place is gorgeous. The animals that you see are just unbelievable in their natural habitat. I love Antarctica. So have a little scare before you get on the boat because we had a health screening. Everyone gets on the boat except for one. They did deny one girl. And then you sail typically like 2 days to get to the continent. And we had such calm weather that we made it there in like a day and a half. So we actually got, they call it like a landing. We got an extra landing that second day that they typically don't do. And then from there, every single day, you're just going to different parts of either the peninsula or the surrounding islands, and you're dropping anchor, and then you're getting on land at least once a day. And then they'll take you around these Zodiac boats anywhere between once or twice a day. So you can have up to like 3 adventures a day. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Minimum 2. Like they will always let you land 1 time a day, and they will always take you around the boat twice.
Okay.
So we are doing that. We are having the time of our lives. And we had this gorgeous day. It's my favorite day. My friends and I, we went ahead and paid like $300 to do like a paddling excursion with a kayak. So we did a kayak in the morning, and then we go to this penguin colony in the afternoon, and it's just blue skies, perfect weather. The water is so calm all day. The next day, it's rainy and snowy, but we see whales like crazy. And then we go to another colony where there's a few penguins still lingering around. And then we do our polar plunge, which is where if you want, you can put on your swimsuit or whatever, and you can just jump into the water. And it's Antarctica, and you're like, well, why not? And it's freezing cold, and you do it anyways.
Yeah. So you actually had me at kayaking because I'm not trying to kayak if it's like 40 degrees outside. So how does that work? What are you wearing to kayak in Antarctica?
For this entire trip, you have to be like bundled. So they tell you what to pack before you ever get on a cruise. And they say like bring base layers, which can be like full wool or, like long johns or anything like that. And then they say like bring a top. They give you a parka. They say bring waterproof pants, and then they give you muck boots, which come all the way up to like your knees. So I was actually almost too hot because I was expecting it to be so cold that I had like I travel a lot. So I bought like base layers. I already have those. So I took my base layers, and I took a few fleece lined shirts. And I remember like some days I was like sweating. But they give you this huge parka to wear. And I mean, you can take it off while you're walking around if you want. And then when you're kayaking, they give you a full dry suit on top of all that stuff. So you just dress with what you want. And they say dress warm. So you're like sweating on the boat with this dry suit on. And then you get in the kayak and you're like, this is perfect. This is heaven.
So what is there? Like, I mean, are there cities? Are there towns? Like, what is is it just just like a port? Like what is actually there in Antarctica?
Yeah. So there are research bases, but you will actually never see any of those on a cruise. So what the cruise ship does is it literally just decide, I'm sure they've worked something out to where like they can go, but basically they just decide where they want to drop anchor. So maybe they see they know a penguin colony lives over here, and like the rocks are flat, so people can get out of the boat and walk around without it being like a major trip hazard. And you
Mm.
just drop anchor, literally, and you're surrounded by these icebergs or brush ice, which is where like ice is all broken up and everything, and it's just floating in the water.
Huh.
And you have these massive mountains on either side, and they're always covered in snow, and they're gorgeous. We saw humpback whales, minke whales, crab eater seals, fur seals, leopard seals, and then two different types of penguins and like thousands of birds. Not thousands, but you get it. Like,
Right. Yeah, well, so that was one of the photos that I saw from your trip. Was definitely one of the cutest penguin pictures that I've ever seen, maybe ever. So that was pretty top notch. You know how I am with little cute animals. So
oh yeah, well, everyone should be like that. So you can Google it. I think typically you can go to Antarctica between November to April. November is when everything's thawing. And I don't think you see whales, but I think you see like adult penguins or something. I don't remember. Like, you'll just have to Google it. But in January is when you see baby chicks. February is when like they're beginning to like kind of grow up. And then in March, which is when we went, you see basically adult chicks that look like adult penguins, but they're still just in their first couple months of life. So they're super curious. Like if you sat down, a penguin would just climb on top of you.
Huh. Is it icy? Now, I also have a terrible fear of slippery surfaces because I fall exclusively on them.
So fun fact, there are two types of penguins that do not like ice.
Huh.
Yeah. So they like tried to find places that's just rocky. No. So Antarctica is icy in some spots, but especially in March, a lot of it has melted on the landings that we did. So, I mean, just picture rock with maybe some like moss growing in some places. And then there was snow, and you could walk on the snow if you wanted to. So we always did because I wasn't worried about falling. But there were certain spots that if you were concerned about that, I probably wouldn't have recommended. But I mean, you don't have to. Like the place is so big that you could easily just stay down by the penguins and you never walk up on the ice. And the only reason why you would go up higher is to get a better vantage view of where we're at.
So would you say, now we're going to do a little head-to-head here, would you say koala bear or penguin?
Oh,
can only have
that's not fair. That is not fair at all.
They canceled March Madness, so we're coming up with all sorts of brackets these days. You know?
So I would, gosh, I don't think this is a fair question at all, but I guess I would almost say penguins, because koalas, you technically, like I held a koala on a sanctuary, but it was for very brief, like you typically just look at them, or penguins, like you can just sit down and they'll climb all over you.
Huh. So penguin's like like the goat of the ice world or something. It's like maybe there could be penguin yoga if we were there with them.
Oh my, there would definitely be penguin yoga, and I would love it. My best friend Taylor, she joked the entire time about stealing a penguin in her backpack, and I mean there were several times that those penguins basically just climbed into her lap and were asking for it.
Right.
We did not steal a penguin, just to.
Right. Well, so the whales that you saw, how? I mean, obviously, it's just estimating. I get, but you know, I've only, for clarity's sake, I've been to the ocean one time. I went to Jacksonville, Florida, for a work trip, and the guy I was with was not at all impressed with the ocean. I guess, I don't know. So I was like, dude, we have to go to the ocean. I've never seen it. Like, I'm here. I have to go. And he's like, all right. And we went and we stayed for like 20 minutes. And then he's like, all right, let's get out of here. And I was new and didn't want to, you know, rock the boat. I mean, now if I was on a work trip, I would just tell them to piss off and I'd do my own thing. But at the time I wasn't ready to do that. Wasn't comfortable to say that. So I just kind of did what he wanted. But so I've definitely never seen any ocean creatures in person. I mean, I guess I've been to Shedd Aquarium in Chicago, but I was like 12 years old. So it was a very long time ago now.
I've actually been to the Shedd when I was 17, and I like want to go back because I don't think I fully appreciated it at that age either.
Yeah. Well, so how, like you said, you saw like the humpback whales, like how big are they in comparison to like the boat that you're in?
I mean, they're bigger than our boat. So we're in, I don't think I've posted any pictures yet, so I'll have to get on that. But a Zodiac boat is kind of God, I don't even know. Think of like when you're on the river and water patrol is coming after you. I've never had water patrol coming after me. But you know, like they're in those like they're in metal boats. So this is like a raft boat almost. But it's probably that
Oh,
big. You have like maybe 10 people. A Zodiac can fit 15 people total, and I think they typically have about 12. So you think one or two guides, if that, and then the rest are tourists.
okay.
But I mean, a humpback whale is massive, and that's primarily what we saw. And they like swam under our boats, like so close to us. And
Hmm.
that animal easily could have like just dumped us over if they wanted to. But they're so gentle,
Right.
which
Huh.
is interesting because they live for so long that some of the guides were telling us that there are definitely humpbacks around that remember the whaling times and like us hunting them. Yet they never act out against us.
Hmm. Well, that's good because it would be all bad for you if they did.
That's what, yeah. So we saw primarily humpbacks, and it's called breaching when they like jump up out of the water, and they weren't doing that. So they are about to migrate, I believe, north. Remember, I'm not a marine biologist, so
Sure.
but all these humpbacks were like feeding like crazy because they're trying to add on the weight now before their migration.
Mm.
And there's like several ways for them to do it, so they can like blow bubbles and an ever tighter circle, and it confuses the krill, which are very small, like little fish-like things,
Hmm.
probably like the size of your finger, if not smaller. And so the whales will blow circles because the krill don't know how to escape the bubbles, and then they'll lunge at them. And it was
Huh.
just like these whales were like lunging out to get the krill, so you could see like their mouths, and their mouths are probably like the size of me, which is 5'3". It's
Wow.
insane.
Yeah. That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
So, did you see any polar bears? Are those there?
No, polar bears are actually only in the Arctic, not Antarctica.
Ah, okay. I see. I see.
But
I'm not
I
a zoologist myself, so.
you're not a professional polar bear person, Walker. You lied to me for years.
I know. I know. I know. I've got that tattoo, but I'm kidding. I don't have any tattoos. Um, so there were whales, there were birds, there were penguins. You said there were seals also?
Yeah, so there were four seals that we saw. A Weddell seal. I'm gonna tell you guys all about seals now because I'm obviously an expert. A Weddell seal, it's just picture like this big, fat, cute seal that's like gray and speckled,
Okay.
and they were precious. There's fur seals, which just look like any seals that you see almost at a zoo or something.
Mm.
And they're probably the most popular that we saw. So I would like you love them, but you don't love them as much as all the other seals.
Get out of here, you damn generic seal.
Yeah. Ooh, I forgot about this one. They were elephant seals, which are massive.
Mm.
And I've been watching a ton of documentaries, and elephant seals, like the males will go up against each other and like throw their bodies against the other male. And we actually saw young bulls practicing that. So that blew my mind. I was like, what? This is only the stuff you see in documentaries where people have been like camping out for months.
Right, right. Yeah, that's cool. That reminds me, I don't know. So Misha, my friend who makes the music for the Walk Show and everything, his dad is an archaeologist, and he has spent a lot of time looking for the location of the Garden of Eden. I don't think he fully expects to like find the religious version of that, but just basically where it would actually be. Also spent a ton of time looking for like where Genghis Khan is buried or whatever. But anyway, so like, oh yeah, super crazy. And yeah, one time I was definitely just flipping through the channels, and I went across the History Channel, and it's just Misha's dad just on the History Channel talking about whatever, and it's like, like what? Like talk about stuff you only see on documentaries. Like this guy's just in the documentary. What's
Yeah,
going on?
like that's crazy.
Mm-hmm. so you go to Antarctica, and how many days did you actually spend there?
Okay, so let's see. We arrived in Antarctica on the 11th and we left on the 15th. So I guess it was 4 full days
Okay.
because is that right? Yeah, because no, we almost had to arrive on the 10th. Let me pull out hold on. The company did a really good job of like marking every single day where we were.
Mm.
So we left Ushuaia on the 8th and we arrived in Antarctica on the 10th. And then we left there on the 15th.
Okay. So you were there the better part of a week.
Yeah. And so, you have to go through the Drake Passage, which can take up to 2 days. So it didn't take us as long getting there. So we did this polar plunge. We saw these whales. It's like snowing on us. It rained a little bit that morning. So it's kind of like an overcast, dreary day. But you're so excited about like the whales and the polar plunge, it doesn't matter. So I remember that night, I'm like, oh, I hope tomorrow's like sunshine and beautiful like the previous day. Because I think still to today, that's my favorite part.
Mm.
And then our expedition leader comes on, and every single day we have a debrief. And she kind of says, like, what's the wind's going to look like? What's the temperature going to look like? Where are we going tomorrow? So in our debrief, she's like, how was everyone's day? And we're all cheering. And then she's like, has everyone enjoyed Antarctica? And we're all cheering. And then she's like, well, sorry, guys, that's going to be our last adventure in Antarctica. And there's just like dead silence on the
Awkward.
Yeah. And so you could tell like she just didn't want to give us the bad news, but she had to. And she's like, we've just been informed by Argentina that they are closing their borders to the US due to COVID. And so back up. This ship is 199 passengers and like 123 crew. So out of the 199, 97 of us are Americans. And so she's like, the Argentinian government is closing their borders to the US on the 18th. So we have to leave now to get us back into port so that you guys can all get home if you want to.
So you were supposed to be there longer.
Yeah, we weren't supposed to disembark until the 17th. And we got to Ushuaia on the 16th.
Whew.
Yeah, so our trip got cut a day.
That's
and we were sailing back and whatever. So when we get into Ushuaia, she again comes on the intercom and she's like, all right, guys, I just want to update you on our situation. And I turned to my best friend and I was like, situation? And I was like, that doesn't sound good. Because we make jokes and some of them are probably inappropriate, but we had made a joke about like being quarantined on the boat. And we're like, no, that won't happen. We were like, what's worst case scenario? And my friend was like, quarantine on the boat. And I'm like, nah, it won't happen. Nope. So we all go into like, they have this big room. It's kind of like an auditorium, but it's all on the same level. And they have these little chairs and seats and like benches. So everyone's like sitting down. And she's like, we were just informed by the Argentinian government that we have to be quarantined mandatory 14 days to make sure no one on this boat has COVID.
Wow.
Yeah. And like, mind you, at this time, COVID still wasn't bad in South America, even at that point. So we kind of had high hopes of like, well, maybe we can continue on with our trip. Like when we were coming back a day early, they told us that we could just stay on the boat that night and then we could continue on our trip because we were flying home from Chile and the border between Argentina and Chile weren't closed yet. So we're like, oh, we'll just go over to Chile, continue our trip, and then we'll fly home like normal. Like Argentina is just being cautious.
Mm-hmm.
And then every day on the boat, it was like seeing something new happen. So I went into panic mode the day that they told us we were in quarantine because I was just like, oh my gosh, do they think someone on this boat has it? And if someone on this boat has it, we're all going to have it.
Yeah, well, at that time, like right around the time that you had left, and I don't know if it was right before it or during the first few days you were gone, like when I was in Orlando, but that was really the stories that I was hearing where it was bad was like people being stuck literally on cruise ships.
Yeah.
In quarantine. And that's where like those were the I don't know if horror stories is the right word, but yeah, basically that's where all the scary information was coming from. So then you find yourself living that exact scenario out.
Yeah. Thankfully I'll get to this, but like our scenario was the best scenario, but I agree. Like I thought the Princess off the California coast.
Yeah.
And I don't remember exactly what the numbers are now, but like it started out just being a small percentage had COVID, and then like I think half the crews or something like that, or at least 30% of the boat got sick because they were in quarantine. And like that day that we found out we were in quarantine, I contacted my parents. I was like, contact the embassy immediately, tell them that we're stuck in on this boat for 14 days because the government is literally going to close down the border. So like we can't
Right.
continue on with our trip at that point. Like we have to just get home. And how are we going to get home if this country isn't going to let us leave? And then like that night you go to dark place and you start Googling all those things about COVID and cruise ships. And it says how cruise ships are the worst place to quarantine because those boats are not built like that. And it doesn't matter if they have filtration systems on the ship that's not built to catch a particle like the COVID.
Mm.
So I like turned to my friend at that point. Remember, this is my panic day. And I was like, I don't want to die on this boat. Like I went really dark.
Sure. Yeah. No, I was curious because obviously, I was aware that you had been put in quarantine, but the communication was very limited. So I was curious as to how you were dealing with that information because I certainly would have been in the exact same position of being like, oh my God, everything that could go wrong is going wrong. Like it's only going to get worse, So
Yeah. Well,
like
that's
that's
it. I feel like everyone has their panic day. And for some, like mine was instant. Like that day that I found out we were in quarantine, I was just like, oh my gosh, I went really dark. The next day, David, so I was traveling with my two best friends, or like my best friend and her husband, which I always travel with them. I'm always the third wheel. So her husband had his panic day the following day, and then Taylor didn't have hers for like a few days later.
mm,
What was interesting is that we had news from all over the world. So the boat every single morning would print off um, China's main uh, news article. They print out the Canadian, the Australian, the USA Today, the international, I think like British news. So we had like 6 to 7 news sources every single day that we had their highlights. And all of a sudden you just see COVID everywhere. Everywhere's talking about cases, everywhere's talking about quarantine. We start reading how in Italy they can't handle the amount of deaths, like the bodies. So they're literally just putting people on trucks, like back in World War II, like just stacking bodies up because they literally don't have any place for them.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Some really crazy stories coming out of like Iran, where Iran had a bunch of cases that were reported, but then there were no deaths, and no one understood why there was no correlation because everywhere else where there was a large outbreak, there were also significant amount of death. And then the Washington Post breaks a story where they show satellite imagery from Iran where they're just digging these huge mass graves. And so, the numbers weren't being reported, but that didn't mean it wasn't happening.
Yeah. And so we're being told, we have flights home from Chile, so we had to cancel all that. We had to cancel all our bus tickets, all of our camping sites, our gear rentals, and everything. And we were told, like, you guys need to book flights home because we have to prove to the Argentinian government that as soon as you get off this boat, you're getting out of the country.
I
So
see.
that started the fun route, or like the fun game with the airline company, because all of a sudden we would book a flight. I would say like, I don't know, maybe 24, 28 hours later, they'd be like, sorry, we've canceled all flights. So then we book another airline company and they'd be like, sorry, we've canceled all flights. And they're canceling like through April or through May.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So all of a sudden we're like on our 8th flight cancellation and we're like sitting in a queue for hours because they're like, we've canceled your flight, but we might have some other ones. And
So not only are you trapped on the boat presently, but you also don't really have a clear plan as to how, even when you're released from the boat, you're going to get back home.
oh yeah, for the longest time we didn't. So the company that we opted to use is called Quark. They're amazing. They're awesome. Like I would highly recommend them for anyone, but they give you the option when you're doing this trip is they will charter a flight from Buenos Aires down to Ushuaia, take you on this boat, and then charter a flight back for you from Ushuaia to Buenos Aires. Well, we're adventurers and we want to get in early and kind of explore and we want to continue on with our trip. So we opted not to do that charter flight. And it also saved us some money. So this entire time, all I know is that as soon as I get off the boat on the 22nd, I'm going to be stuck in Ushuaia, which I'm sure most of your listeners don't know where that is, but pull up a map. It's literally the southernmost city in the entire world. It's waterlocked. It's an island, technically, in Argentina.
Ah.
And while we're on the boat, I forgot this part. So we're trying to book flights home, right? They're constantly being canceled. Then the Argentinian government, who wants us out and who has closed the borders to the US, tells us that, hey, it's a national holiday. So we're actually not going to allow any domestic flights from the 20th through the 25th because they don't want their people traveling during that time frame. So instead of just saying, if you have an Argentinian passport, you'll be denied at the airport, they're like, we're just going to cancel all flights. And I'm like, how are we supposed to get from Ushuaia to Buenos Aires? It's like, I don't know, 3,000 kilometers or something.
Okay, yeah. Can't really hoof it.
Yeah, no, because Taylor at one point posted on Facebook, she was like, if we get stuck in Argentina, is there anyone that we could stay with? And so many, I'm just going to say it, like ignorant people were like, we'll just get to the embassy. Just walk there. And I'm like, you clearly do not know where we are. We will literally have to swim, risk hypothermia. You have to cross over into the Chile border, actually, to like take that road up to Argentina and then back over. And turns out, oh, while we were on the boat, Chile also closed their border. So just getting to the embassy is not that easy.
Sure, right. Yeah, it's not a Tom Cruise movie where the embassy is just around the corner and you just have to sprint there.
Yeah.
They accept you with open arms.
Yeah. So it was fascinating though, because I told you my parents contacted the embassy and I had more faith in the embassy before going on this trip. I always thought like, oh, if I'm ever in a situation, I can show up to the embassy and they'll at least help me. The embassy started sending us emails like, don't show up on our doorsteps. You need to work with your airlines to get home. We are not chartering a flight for months. And if we do charter a flight, they literally said it'll be more expensive than a commercial flight.
Wow.
Yeah, I was very disappointed in our government. I actually still just am.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's fair. I think we all experience that in different ways, but that's certainly a very profound and pronounced time to encounter the
Yeah.
reality that the government is not quite the hookup that it's presented to be oftentimes.
Yeah. So at that time, like, I paint a really grim picture, but I'll get to the happy stuff. But like at that point, I was just like, well, we'll just show up to the embassy, right? Like at that point, Cork had told us they would help us get to Buenos Aires. And I'm like, if every flight out of Argentina is just completely closed down, we'll go to the embassy. And one of my friends was like, well, they're not going to help us. And I was like, we'll just say we won't leave until they do. And turns out someone in Peru actually did that and they arrested them.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. Like an American went in and was like, no, I'm not leaving. And they're like, okay, well, we're going to call the cops on you.
Wow, it's not even arrested by American officials, but arrested by the Peruvians.
Yeah, like the Peruvian and like our U.S. embassy in Peru called the cops because an American would not leave. And I don't know if they were like yelling or anything like that, but they would like not leave the premise. And so they called the cops.
Yeah, they don't show that in the action movies ever. That's never that's never one of the scenes.
Yeah. So yeah, it was a very interesting time. And like we have all these nationalities, we have your variety of Europeans, we have Australians, we have New Zealanders. There's like one Argentinian, one Chilean on the boat. And then, like 97 of us Americans. So it was just a very interesting because everyone's trying to get home. Different borders are closing. Like different countries will let you transit through. Some people had just started like their year-long travel. So at first they thought they could just like wait it out in Chile or Buenos Aires. And then they realized that's just not possible and that they have to go home.
Wow.
Yeah. So I paint this really grim picture, right? That boat became like our utopia. So I panicked on day one. David panicked on day two. Taylor panicked a little bit later when she realized how many flights we have canceled and like these airlines aren't offering vouchers.
Mm-hmm.
But Cork went above and beyond. So we were being fed 5 times a day. They give you like a light snack before breakfast. They give you breakfast. They give you lunch. They give you tea time and then dinner. So you have the option to eat 5 different times if you want. And instead of just like canceling that once we entered in quarantine and like, we only booked this trip and through the 17th and we were on the boat through the 22nd. They kept everything like normal. They fed us 5 times a day if you want to. They put on activities. They did like a boot camp. They did like a knot tying class. They had yoga every single day. Our boat had a saltwater pool, a gym, and a sauna, along with the dance floor. So like one night we did karaoke night. One night they did like TED Talks. One night they had a comedy night. Like it went from get me off this boat to I never want to leave this boat. We don't have COVID on it. And this is the safest place I can possibly be.
Right. So yeah. So did anyone from the boat, as far as you know, was anyone ever ill or?
I mean, people got like sick. Like I think one guy had a sore throat, but we had a doctor on the boat. And so I was talking to him one time and he said, we do not have COVID. He's like, if we had COVID, he's like, we would be seeing fevers. We would be seeing multiple people. He's like, no one on here is sick like that. Now, you might have a sore throat or something, but that's not COVID.
Well, that's good then. So how long were you on the boat in total then? Because you went on the 15th is when you said you returned from Antarctica. And then was it a full week or was it longer than that?
So I was on the boat for 15 days.
Well, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So we were only supposed to be on it for like 9 days, the 8th through the 17th. And not even like a full 9 days, like maybe 8 days, right? And then we got quarantined until the 22nd. Well, by that point, Argentina had like grounded all domestic flights. So Cork, the company, was able to get one charter flight out on the 22nd from Ushuaia to Buenos Aires, and they just filled it with, most of the passengers. And our flight was later on the 24th. So Cork told us everyone book flights home. And at one point, they said stop booking flights home because they knew all of ours were getting canceled. And they're like, we don't even know if we can get you off the boat on the 22nd. And we're not going to leave you stranded here. So just stop booking until we have confirmation that we have these flights going to Buenos Aires. So then the next day they say, yes, we got confirmation. We will have flights, but don't book your flights until the 24th. And they were just being honest with us. They're like, in case the Argentine government doesn't let this plane fly out, then you have a little bit of wiggle room with your flights.
I see.
So we booked our flight at like 6 p.m. on the 24th. So when the charter flight on the 22nd went out, Cork decided to keep us on the boat until the 23rd to let people that had like earlier flights or like medical issues go off first.
I see.
So there was 29 passengers on the boat the 29th, along with all the crew. And then we all got off. So the 29 passengers, plus the expedition team, plus some of the hotel staff. And we got on the flight from Ushuaia to Buenos Aires. And this is where I'm saying like Cork went above and beyond because then they also got us transportation from the airport to Buenos Aires to the hotel. And they put us up in a hotel for a night.
Oh, that's good.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they probably spent thousands of dollars that they didn't have to. And I love that company now. I'm like, my government will not get me out of this country, but I know Cork will help me get out of this country.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
It's interesting. So I flew to get home. I flew into Chicago and then into St. Louis. And if flying into Buenos Aires, there's hardly anyone on the street. It's crazy. And like police will pull you over if you're driving to ask you what you're doing. And like to enter any of their airports, you have to get a health scan. If you have a fever, they won't let you enter. And then I fly into Chicago where I literally did not get a health check as I came through customs. And you see all these people on the road and even driving in St. Louis, I'm like, we are not taking it seriously enough.
And that's after we've started the stay-at-home orders and like it's clear that this is very serious. Again, all the major sports leagues are canceled. Everything. All events, basically all public events are basically canceled by that time.
Yeah. And based off what I've seen in another country, we aren't doing enough. Like the fact that I walked through customs in Chicago and no one scanned me. Are you kidding me? Because I was not sick on the boat, but we had to go through so many airports. I spent 20 hours sitting in Brazil in their airport because my flight got in that evening on the 24th at like 1 a.m. And my next flight wasn't until the following 10 p.m.
that's definitely a sentiment that a lot of people have, is that despite what we're doing, it's actually still not enough. And I don't actually know if the United States can do enough, because I don't know that the population will accept it. Like in China, they had measures similar to what you're describing, where it's like if you enter a big, a public building, whether that be an airport, an apartment, a train station, whatever it is, you get checked right there for a fever. And if you have one, you get sent, and this is in China, you get sent to a fever clinic, and then there they test you for COVID. And if you have that, you get quarantined, and that's it. But here, like that, people just, especially in the Midwest out here, like people would not tolerate that. Like people would be brandishing their guns, and you know what I mean? Like,
well, and yeah, I completely get it. So I was talking to my mom this morning. Again, she's a nurse, and I was telling her this, and I was like, I don't know what Chicago would have done if I had fever. Like at that point, do you quarantine me? Do you like give me a sign that says I have a fever? Watch out for this girl. Like I don't know. But so there are 13 airports that you have to fly back if you're flying from a certain country. So Argentina wasn't one of those at-risk countries, but Brazil was. And my ticket were two separate tickets. So I flew to Brazil to get out of Argentina, and I purchased a separate ticket from Brazil home. So as far as the US government knows, when they look at my ticket, I'm coming from Brazil. They don't know that I've been in Antarctica. They don't know that I've been quarantined. They don't know any of this. So they should have asked me a ton of questions, because Brazil is an at-risk country right now. And no one cared.
To some extent, the quarantine that you were on really only mattered for that, because again, to your point, you then went and left and traveled through multiple different airports and countries. So even if you were safe when you were on the boat, who knows what's happened in the time since then?
Oh, yeah. So I don't feel sick, and I really hope I don't get it, but I'm just acting right now as if I have COVID, because we just traveled too much. Like, and Argentina, like I said, I thought they did a really good job. They were trying to. Now, shutting their borders doesn't make any sense to me if you want us all to go home, but that's besides the fact.
Right.
You had to get scanned at both airports before you could enter. On one of them, they scanned you again when you were inside the airport to make sure you didn't have a fever. But they kept on touching our passports. Like they would wear gloves and they would touch your passport, not do anything with this glove, and then touch my passport and then hand my passport back to me. And don't get me wrong, like I can wash my hands, I can wash my passport, but like I can only wash so many things. Like if you're touching all my stuff, like what am I supposed to do?
Right.
And they would go around, they had barriers up to where like you couldn't step right on top of them at the check-in. They would go around yelling at people if you were standing in lines to be like 2 feet apart, 2 feet apart. So they were like as adamant as they possibly could. In Buenos Aires, they walked around with hand sanitizer and would randomly spray your, like you would hold your hands out. They wouldn't just spray you without your permission, but they would do that, and then they would spray your phones for you.
Huh.
So, I mean, they were trying, but they were still like touching my passport after they touched how much other stuff. And there were some people that I saw, like they had masks on, they had gloves, and then they reach up and pull their mask down and scratch their face and then put their mask back up. And I get it. Like, it's just human nature, like your face itch. So you don't even think about it, but I'm like, you're defeating the whole purpose now.
Right. Yeah. It's, so I guess, really, even when you're on the quarantine, you're almost to some extent still in kind of this might be the wrong word, but almost kind of a bubble where you're not actually, because you're on the boat where everyone's safe. And like you said, they're feeding you and they're entertaining you and all this stuff. So it's not the kind of grim reality that we're living now here at home, right?
Yeah, no. So I actually think I had like, no one should take pity on me. Like, don't get me wrong. I was quarantined for like a week. That was, outside my trip. But the Argentinian government decided to like recognize the time that we were in Antarctica. So we had 14 days on the boat, but half of that was our trip. The boat was extremely safe. We're being fed. We're getting drinks. I mean, we had St. Pat's party. Like I hugged people before I got off the boat because they were like, once we got off the boat, we can't hug. So like everyone that you become friends with, and you become, out of 199 people, that sounds like a lot, but I mean, you're seeing these people day in and day out. So yeah, there's some that I never talked to or I didn't want to talk to because I was just like, whatever. But there were a lot of people that I've made really good friends with. And I'm like, I will see you again in my life, or I will talk to you again in my life.
Right.
But yeah, it got to I think I might have said this already earlier, but it got to the point where I was like, please don't take me off this boat. Can we just stay here for 2 months? Can we sail back to Antarctica?
Right. Yeah. Let's
With
go hang
enough
out with the big.
provisions, we'll be fine.
So, I mean, obviously you've made it back. Now you're in self quarantine back at home
Yep,
for
day
at least a
4.
couple of weeks. Day 4. So, is your self quarantining as much fun as the boat quarantine was?
No. So Walker knows this about me, but for your listeners, I am the definition of an extrovert. So I went from one sharing rooms with a room with a friend, like friends, and then also being
Right.
surrounded by people that I could joke with and hug and dance or whatever. Um, to all of a sudden being trapped in my house where yes, I can go outside and I can jog around the block, but I have no social interaction whatsoever. And my house is way smaller than a boat.
Right. So, would you say, and I get there's going to be some recency bias, but I'm curious, even with all of this that happened, would you say that this is your favorite trip that you've taken, or would you say another trip ranks up there with it?
This one is so different. I would say this is going to be my most interesting trip ever. Because I never thought I'd be quarantined. I never thought we would go through a pandemic. I literally felt like I was watching the world end because they were talking about these flights canceling and these type of restaurants are closing and now these sports events are closing and we watched that all from a boat.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, our trip was supposed to be epic. We were going to Antarctica. We were backpacking in Argentina. We were backpacking in Chile to some of the some remote places that are just supposed to be gorgeous. And I feel like we still got the really pretty part, but the quarantine was just interesting. We made it as fun as possible. We made jokes, we made friends. I heard of a few cruise ships where they were locked in their rooms. And I think if I had been locked in my room, my sanity might have gone.
Yeah, that's kind of what I imagined when I heard that you were quarantined, was that it was like you go in your room, you stay there, in 2 weeks we'll let you out. And that would be, to your point, that would be pretty devastating.
Oh, yeah. I mean, our rooms were so small. We had cards. I bought cards because they had a little boutique on the boat. So I guess my friends and I would have played cards, but we would have probably had meltdowns and everything if we'd been quarantined to our room. And I think if we had COVID on the boat, that would have been the case.
Right.
Since we had a doctor, he checked people, no one was showing signs. And that's one thing, maybe one person can hide their signs, but as close as we all were, we're eating together. They serve you in a buffet style way of food. So you're constantly sharing the tongs and everything. So many people would have gotten it. You wouldn't have been able to hide the signs.
Right. No, that makes sense. Well, I'm glad that you made it back, and at least so far, it seems like everything is okay.
Yeah, I read that it takes an average of 5 days for someone to show symptoms. So talk to me on day 6. Still hope I'm going strong.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of in the same boat where I don't think I have it from Orlando because I never showed any symptoms. But honestly, it's, I mean, I've gone to the grocery store, right, and interacted with the person who's at the checkout counter, and that person has interacted with everyone else who's coming through the store. I mean, obviously there's more than one cashier, but not that many. And it's it just seems like it's so almost impossible to really mitigate the risk.
Yeah, so that's why I just assume that I have it right now. And so when I came back, so I landed in St. Louis, and then had to drive, and I didn't have any food at my house. So I had to go to the grocery store. And I went and I made sure I was really careful. I wiped down the cart. Any food anything that I picked up, I was just okay, well, now I have to buy it. I was very cautious of what I touched to make sure I didn't touch anything extra. And then when I went to the checkout line, I went ahead and bought 2 bottles of wine. I'm well, I'm going to be quarantined for 2 weeks. 2 bottles isn't that big of a deal. So the woman comes over and all I have is
enough to me.
What?
I said, doesn't sound like enough to me.
Yeah. Well, that might be true, but I had also been drinking a lot on the boat. So,
Sure.
Moderation. So I go to the checkout and I just did self-checkout because I was I don't want to infect anyone. Going on the assumption I have it, I don't want to infect anyone. So I'm checking out and then it comes to the alcohol. So I scan it. I have my passport ready for her. And I tried to hold it to where she doesn't need to touch it. And this girl touches it and enters in the information. And immediately I was I'm not trying to scare you. I just traveled through several different countries to get home. I'm here because I'm about to quarantine. I was like, I don't know if I have it or not. I'm not showing symptoms. You need to wash your hands immediately before you touch anything else. And you should have seen her face. Like, she was so happy coming over to me, and her face just dropped.
Yeah, I bet.
And I was like, I'm not trying to scare you, but like, I'm just trying to be diligent here and save you in case I do have it.
Yeah. It's a wild set of circumstances that I don't think anyone, clearly no one here was prepared for, whether that be, the government or just the public in general, which to some extent, it's fair that the government, to be critical of the government and their response to all of this. But at the same time, like the government is made up of the population, right? It's not some monolith that exists independently of the people. And so it's like, if no one else in the country is ready, then the government's probably not ready either. You know what I mean? Because it's made up of those same people. So it's only time will tell how it will unfold. My hope to some extent is that because of where we are in the Midwest and a not that densely populated area, that maybe it won't, hit us like it has in New York City or something like that, for example. But that's probably just a naive hope on my part.
Well, that's what, honestly, like, I wish the government would just come out and require everyone to quarantine right now. Like, go to the store, get what you need, and just plan on staying in your house for 30 days. Because what's concerning me is that, like, different parts of the states are doing it at different times. So it doesn't really matter. Like, it's almost like, well, who's the last one to do it? Because that's when almost everyone else needs to re-quarantine when the last one does.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I mean, even like here, we live in Springfield, Missouri, and so they have a stay-at-home order here and for the county that we're in, but I don't know that the neighboring counties have that same stay-at-home order.
Yeah, right? Our state currently does not have a stay-at-home order. Like, St. Louis just did one, and we have one for 30 days. And that's what kind of scares me. Comes like, well, once I do this 30 days, I'm perfectly fine with abiding by that because I don't want anyone to die if I'm a carrier of it.
Sure.
But like, okay, if the neighboring county does it and like a month from now, are we going to have to redo it because we're traveling back and forth between the two counties?
Yeah. Who knows? Time will tell, I guess, what will happen.
Well, so taking this back to travel, because I think that's really what you want this podcast to be about. And I love talking about traveling. The traveler in me is just like, oh, so I still have 3 weeks worth of vacation. And I'm like, I still want to use my 3 weeks worth of vacation. So several people on the boat were like, I'm never coming back to Argentina. I'm never doing a cruise again. And I'm like, well, I am coming back to Argentina. I am probably going to do an Arctic cruise at some point. And who knows, maybe I'll go back to Antarctica. But I'm just like, okay, can all this calm down so we can enjoy summer and so I can travel again? First world props.
I think that's where everyone is, though, is they, everyone just wants to be able to imagine that they're going to return to, whatever normal looks like on the other side of this. And I don't know what it looks like, but you're right. We have been talking about it in kind of grim terms, and that's why when we started talking, I didn't want to just lead. Obviously, I knew about the Antarctica trip and those sorts of things, but that's why I didn't want to lead with that, because there's a lot of doubt and uncertainty in the world right now, and it's enjoyable to hear stories of someone doing something that they are invigorated by, and something that they're passionate about, and something that they really get something out of, whether that be doing something locally with their friends, even, or something like you've done, where you've gone and taken a trip to literally every continent in the world now.
Yeah, I mean, you have some awesome people come on and speak, so I appreciate you having me. But yeah, I mean, from someone that was quarantined on a boat for 7 days, and I had like a scare coming home, like, it's just scary trying to get home. I mean, that hasn't dimmed my passion for travel at all. If anything, I'm just like, okay, I'm like chomping at the bit to go again. I feel like every time I come home from traveling, I'm like, all right, I'm ready to go again. Why am I working?
Yeah, well, so there's an interesting, phenomenon kind of. In World War II, the Germans started bombing London, right? Mm-hmm. And so the English government was really worried that the people were all going to go into mass hysteria, and that, it would just be not only the actual people who were affected by the bombing, but everyone around them would also be terrified, and society would crumble and whatever. And it would actually kind of the opposite effect, where obviously people's homes got bombed, and so those people who were directly impacted were oftentimes killed. So certainly there was an effect. However, the people who might live literally next door to where the bomb happened or went off or was dropped or whatever, but didn't actually lose that much themselves, instead of devolving into this like hysteric panic, it actually went the other direction, where it was almost like they were more courageous, because it was like, well, I survived it. You know what I mean? Like, now I'm actually emboldened by the fact that the bomb went off right next to my house, and yet here I stand. And so instead of the population becoming widely terrified, again, it really went another direction, where they became more brave, I guess, for lack of a better word. So maybe to some extent you're kind of experiencing that as well, where it's like you went through, again, like you said, when you found out you're going to be stuck on the boat, what's the worst case scenario? Being stuck on the boat. And then beyond that, flights are being canceled, can't get out, don't know how you're going to get, an embassy won't help, like all these things, all these check boxes of ways that you think it's going to be solved. And yet in the end, you survived, right? You made it. So yeah. I think that probably makes sense, that it's almost kind of steeled you towards the dangers of it, even though, maybe on the surface it wouldn't seem like that's what it would do.
Oh, no. I mean, I definitely think that has an impact. And so travel related, like when a person travels, I feel like you meet other like-minded people, and just opens your world. And that was one thing. Antarctica isn't like an easy place to get to. And typically those trips book out far in advance, or you're like a last minute person that just happened to like weasel your way on. I shouldn't say weasel. You happen to like plan it just right to get on the boat. So I met so many incredible people, some that were like my age, some that were younger, some that were way older, and like hearing their stories. I mean, there was a guy on the boat that had hiked Everest and like suffered frostbite and all this other stuff, and it just empowers you. And you're like, what are you doing with your life that, like, if you're not happy with it, you need to fix it and change it and do what you really want to do.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a powerful truth, and one that people don't observe often enough. It's something that, I was talking to you before we started recording about my life coach that I talked to, who was actually a guest on the Walk Show several months ago, Ashley Thomas. But it's something that she constantly talks about, is like, what's the story that you've created for whatever circumstance you find yourself in, and or what are the rules that you have said exist for whatever predicament you find yourself in. Because the truth is oftentimes it is just that. It's just a set of rules, or a narrative that we've spun up that isn't really what it has to be, but we just believe it. And so then if you believe that that's what's true, then even if it's not true, it's definitely real, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that definitely does. And I feel like I did listen to that podcast. I will be honest, I haven't listened to all the podcasts, but I do remember that one.
Sure. Yeah, she's great. And yeah, just a very interesting insight that she shares pretty frequently, and one that I think, at least with me, resonates a lot, and I think, would with most people.
Yeah. Well, it's always nice to be like reminded of those things too. Like, you think you know it, and then you're like, that was a good refresher.
Yeah, that's something I've also been coming to, is, there's all these different lessons that I think I've internalized, and then fast forward a few months and here I am, quote unquote, learning the lesson again. And I think it kind of speaks to the journey versus the destination thing, where it's like, there's not an end status where you're just quote unquote enlightened, or you just have it all figured out. It's always a process. It's always, there's always pushing and pulling. And so you do need those refreshers, and you do need those reminders. And, like I said, I've never traveled in the way that you have, but the little bit that I've traveled, especially for pleasure, like when I went to Podfest, for example, in Orlando, definitely a similar experience. In that case, I'm going to a podcast conference, so it's even more so like-minded people, because we're all there specifically for that one thing. But yeah, it absolutely opens your mind to just how many different ways things can be real or can exist. I mean, when I was in Orlando this last time, I saw a guy stand up out of a wheelchair with like this belt of electrodes or something on, and I think he had some sort of surgical implant so that they could activate the belt and it would fire electricity through his legs.
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
he's completely paralyzed from the belly button down, and gets up out of a wheelchair. Now, of course, he's using his arms to some extent and stuff too, but he was able to stand there, and that was pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
So
How incredible. Like, that's remarkable for you to see, but how incredible is that for him?
oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's definitely not my moment.
But I think that's still like cool to witness those kind of moments though. So I'm not like
Yeah.
downgrading you at all. I'm just like, I can't imagine being you, and I can't imagine being him even.
Yeah, I was lucky enough. Actually, they had a mixer event, and so I got to sit. You basically sit at like a table with 6 other people, and everyone introduces themselves and trades business cards, and it's like 5 minutes. It's kind of like speed dating for podcasters. And then when they tell you time's up, and then everyone stands up, and everyone has a little card that tells you which table to go to next. So it makes sure that you sit with different people every time.
Yeah.
And yeah, the first table I sat at, I actually happened to sit right next to that guy who was in the wheelchair. Now, it wasn't until the next day that he actually stood up, but so I wasn't aware that was coming. But yeah, really, really interesting guy. Just really, really nice and fascinating character.
So that was, I'm going back to like this Antarctica trip. That was the kind of cool thing about being in quarantine, is I feel like we got to know the expedition team a lot better. Like during the actual trip, I feel like we saw them, but like they're busy. Like when they're not taking you on Zodiacs, they have assigned duties to do on the boat. And
Right.
that 5 days, like they didn't really have that much to do per se. Like some of them were super busy, but others were not. So it was really nice, like to get to know some of these people in a more, just personal, casual way.
Yeah, for sure. No, that makes sense because you actually, you kind of, not that you weren't always peers, certainly you were, but just you kind of broke that invisible barrier between like customer and employee to some extent because you're all stuck there together.
Yeah, it's like we're all trapped.
Right.
Trapped on this boat.
Well, again, I am very glad that you've made it back, and I will continue to check up and make sure that you're doing well here after day 5. But thank you very much for coming and sharing your stories and talking about all of your travel, but certainly this most recent experience, because it's a fascinating subject and a story that I don't think anyone else has. I mean, obviously 198 other people have that story, but they're not on the walk show, so
well, thanks
they
for letting
don't
me
count.
ramble about it. I love talking about traveling, and especially since this was the most recent trip.
Yeah, well, that's why I was really eager to have you to schedule this recording, pretty quickly after you got back, because obviously it's